call this Altoona City Council work session to order. We'll now have a moment of silent prayer. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time we'll open up the floor for public comment. If anybody would like to address council, you may do so by dialing the number on your screen, and please give your name and address when prompted.
There's a delay, typically. Yeah. Okay. Did we do the roll call? Did we do a roll call?
It's on. That must be 13.
Okay, seeing none, we will close the floor for public comment and move into the discussion items. The first one being financial review for 2020.
Okay, as promised, I'm going to bring you overview of our financial situation, particularly in relation to our general fund. Really, it's unaudited information for the year 2020. Looking at the revenue highlights, real estate tax revenues in 2020, for the very first time since we underwent the reassessment in 2017, actually exceeded the prior year in terms of current collections. So that's yeah, it really hasn't happened in any prior year again since the reassessment. So we're just about $265,000 ahead of where we were the prior year, and that's about split evenly between the current collections and delinquent collections, which are both higher.
Omar, I'm sorry, would it be all right if we ask questions as we went, or would you prefer that we wait till you're done?
Well, I have a slide for questions, but
Okay.
Sure, whatever questions you have.
So, going back, you know, what we saw before reassessment was every year the assessed value of property in the city was a slowly declining every year. As we tore properties down, or, you know, nonprofits like the school district or the hospital would expand and properties would come off the tax roll, or people would appeal assessments.
Right.
And it would always go down. So, is that still the case with assessed values? Is it still doing that?
It's still gone down every year since the reassessment.
Okay, but
we'll
so
see.
that makes this even all that more remarkable.
Yeah, it's more maybe a bit of an anomaly, but
Right.
you're getting a higher percentage. The explanation would be you're getting a higher percentage of folks paying their current taxes, which is, I think, a good thing.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Some other highlights, earned income tax receipts were almost $5 million, and which really about 10% over budget. Business privilege and mercantile tax, right about what we budgeted for 2020. And again, we were thinking those would be adversely impacted by the COVID pandemic, and I'm sure they were. And we can talk about that later on a later slide, but nonetheless, they came in at or slightly above budget. We received about $775,000 in unbudgeted grant money. That's for Green Light Go and hazard mitigation grants. And year-end totals are about 106% of what we budgeted for last year. There's this bar chart, and you can see, looking from the bottom of the chart, the real estate tax budget was about $10,300,000. Next biggest category would be charges for service. Earned income, of course, is a large section of that, and other revenue, which is really mostly the transfer in from the Act 205 fund. Those were the budgeted numbers. If you look at the next bar chart here, you can see really what we received a little bit. Again, the real estate tax a little bit higher, earned income tax a little bit higher, charges for service pretty much right on budget. And if you look at those together, you can see on the left-hand side of the stacked columns, that is the actual budgeted revenues in dark blue, and then to the right of that in the purple shade is the actual revenue receipts. It's kind of hard to tell the difference. You can see the numbers below in the table below. Really, probably the biggest difference between budgeted and actual shows up in the grant revenue, and I already pointed that out to you. Looking at the numbers, for last year and the prior year, you can see how they compare. These were really taken off of the spreadsheet that was circulated with the presentation, or prior to the presentation, I should say. Moving on to expenditures for some highlights. Preliminary expenditures. Again, these are all preliminary expenditures because these are unaudited. Budget about 98.5% of what we anticipated for last year, and about $576,000 more than the prior year. One good note is the public safety departmental expenditures all came in right about budget, slightly below. The chief executive and public works were slightly over budget. And then I mentioned the revenues that come in for the unbudgeted grants. We're seeing some of those expenditures last year, but we're also seeing them continuing this year because we had the grants the revenue prior to the expenditure. Looking at the budgeted expenditure categories, these are the primary categories that we use: public safety, public works, debt service, and administration. Public safety consists of the police, fire, and code enforcement departments. Public works is, of course, public works. Debt service is debt service, and administration is really every other category of expenditure that we have funneled into that section. And looking at the actual expenditures, debt service slightly lower than budgeted. Administration, I believe, is close. Public safety, I mentioned, that's about 99% of what we budgeted. Public works, just a little bit over what we budgeted.
Omar, can you elaborate what the reason might be for a lower expense with debt service?
Yeah, so we refinanced some debt, and I believe that just lowered our payment in this particular last year. So that is my thought about why that's lower than budget, because really it's just a table. We have, this debt service for this particular year, you know, the debt service is already on schedule is what I'm saying, so.
Okay.
But that's one of the reasons why we refinance debt is to, you know, lower those payments, so.
I just would like to try to make sure in the future, kind of what the terms are to make sure we're not extending the payback period, or if we are, that we're not carrying those costs onward for something that's already been sunk.
Yeah, it's, I can't say for the distant past, I think we did spread it out as far as we could. But in more recent borrowings, we've not taken nearly as long of a time
Payback period.
horizon.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty sure this last time around it was based on lower interest rates and being able to refinance.
Yeah, so we look at that at least annually. I was working with our most recent advisor for this year as well for some outstanding debt, but it just really hasn't shown its value yet. If we ever get something that I can bring to council for, you know, refinancing that could save us, we typically look at 2 or 3% of savings. And again, you have issuance costs built in there. But yeah, I would definitely bring that to council, and we're looking at it, you know, periodically. Well, can't seem to advance this thing, so let's see. There we go. So this is actually the comparison of those budgeted categories, budget to actual for last year. Again, you can see how close most of these really were to budget. And this is the actual categories, the actuals, again, when I say actual, I mean preliminary, at least for 2020. 2019 is, of course, their audited actuals. So you can see the various categories there. Some of the higher ones, like the executive, the manager, we actually had a full-time manager last year as opposed to the year before, so you can see the difference there. And again, debt service at the bottom as well. We also wanted to look at some of the preliminary balances we have in some of the other funds that we have. Back in the mid 2019, we established some additional funds for the city. They were the grant match fund, vehicle replacement fund. The year prior to that, we had established a special reserve fund. And then throughout time, we've had a certain amount of an unassigned fund balance. And I just wanted to kind of touch on those and where we preliminarily think they were at the end of last year. The unassigned general fund balance, which is on the bottom, really, we had set that up at about 5.3 million back in 2019. It was about 6 million at the end of last year. The equipment replacement fund was established for about $5.7 million. It's still at about $5.7 million. The grant match fund likewise was established for $1 million. There hasn't really been anything paid out of that yet, but we do have reserved about $158,000 as local match for some grants that we have ongoing or are waiting for. The special reserve fund has really taken a hit, and it's not on your slide, but we had about $4.3 million back in mid-2019. It's down to about $1.7 million. and that's funded some projects, and the most recent big hit it's taken was payment to the Conservation District of about $1.1 million in relation to, stormwater-related issues.
And that was mandated by the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring that out to the taxpayers that that was no choice.
Yeah, and I think down the road, we're not gonna be able to meet that same monetary payment every year without doing something a little different, and that's certainly gonna be a subject for discussion at a future.
Is that an annual or once every 2 years?
The overall cost of that program is, I want to say 2 million. Our portion's around $2 million for a 5-year period starting in 2018. So it'd be 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So, that's the cost of the implementation of all those projects. So it's kind of it starts out slow, and as designs start and then they go to construction, it's kind of picked up here. And
Now, being part of that program, do we get credits, or I believe the system works on credits. We have to have so many credits completed to come into compliance with DEP. So we spent 1.1 million in Logan Township to dredge Lakemont Park. So you see what I'm saying, that we're City of Altoona, and we're doing by state law, we're having to bring these projects into compliance. I know it's all unfunded, but I mean, do we get some credit for that?
yeah, part of our stormwater permit is that we have to, I guess, do so many projects to reduce the pollution as part of Altoona, and it's based on impervious area, impacted streams, and population. So that's the formula that went into it. Yes, we are doing projects outside of the city, but if we had to do them in the city,
It'd be harder.
it would be a lot more expensive if we didn't
Okay.
kind of co-op with it. So, it's the cheapest way to stay, I think, within the confines of the law that we
But as
currently in.
as for credits, I mean, this is more carrot and stick, and it's mostly stick if we
Yes.
don't do this. It's really
Mhm.
what it is.
Yeah.
It's, we get penalized if we don't do this by the Commonwealth. So,
Right.
It's,
And EPA.
yeah, it's kind of a bitter pill that we have to take, so.
And thankfully, we were able to learn our lesson by watching some of the municipalities in the eastern part of the state that had to go through this before we did. Some of them were fined very heavily, so we knew early on that we had no choice but to get on board and make sure we were doing things the way they wanted it done.
Okay, moving on, I think we can have some takeaways from this presentation. One is that we don't really know what the effects of the pandemic were on our revenue stream or our expenditures. However, we do know that it was, we don't know the effects, the true effects, but we do know it's only a matter of degree. We came in at or above budget on some of our primary revenue sources, but we don't know what we don't know about what didn't happen. So we can't compare that to a non-pandemic 2020 because such a thing did not exist. Also, our grant revenues, they were unbudgeted, came in higher than we budgeted. And the expenditures were just now starting to experience really. And generally speaking, we aligned with our budget probably as well, at least from a preliminary standpoint, as any year I can remember in recent memory. So.
I mean, I think given all the stimulus dollars that the federal government keeps putting out there, the effect of the pandemic, it might be years till we really sort that all out, until we figure out what the economy of the country is going to look like when it's all said and done. Or am I misstating that?
Yeah, I mean, pending the fire hose ever stops spewing money.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the takeaways too have to do with how well our department heads and staff did with the budgeting process. And, you know, everybody worked very well within their means, and we had brought forth a pretty cautious and conservative budget, and I thought everybody did a really good job of keeping things where they needed to be kept.
Omar, that nearly $800,000 in unbudgeted grant money,
Yeah.
and you had highlighted those two programs, that's all pass through, right? That's money that we didn't have in the budget, but it's coming in and it's gonna go out,
Yeah,
right?
so there's, and Nate, you could probably talk more directly about this, but, because they're public works related projects or grants. But yeah,
Yeah, so for, when we get grants from PennDOT, you're exactly right, they're passed through, they're reimbursable, so the city either puts out and then, you know, takes back in once we submit the bill, or it comes in and gets put into a
It's
fund.
not like it's
and-
found, it's not, you know, I think from the standpoint of this going out to the public, it's not like found money. I mean, this money's already spoken for, and it's just coming through the budget, so.
Yeah, it'd be revenue neutral.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have.
well, just in case, there's a whole slide for it.
I'm sorry, Omar.
It's
I-
time for questions.
You know me, I get ants in the pants, and I get antsy there, and,
I think it's,
wanna
I
jump
think
in
it's,
with
I
questions.
prefer that way because you're actually able to kind of have a dialogue one-on-one. But I do have a question regarding real estate revenues. Do we have any data as to whether people in 2020 perhaps paid the penalty? More people perhaps paid the real estate penalty. They paid their property taxes late, because I know that we did the extension initially. Just something I'm thinking of here.
I don't have specific data, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the current amount exceeded where it had been in the prior year. So that means more people, even though we had, you know, a lower assessed value, meaning our billing for real estate tax was slightly lower than the
Mhm.
prior year, we actually received more in current collections and in delinquent collections. So, but those delinquent collections can actually be over a 3-year period. So we don't know if that's if they were delinquent for 3 years or if they were.
Oh, I
delinquent
see.
for-
Yeah, so at this point, it's hard to dissect that and
Yeah.
figure out where the increase is from. But, you know, think about that, it's up, and we actually gave an extension
Yeah.
because we were worried about people's ability to get it
To meet
paid
the
on time.
deadline.
So, yeah, so,
Was there a stipulation in one or more of the stimulus checks about unpaid debts? And it, like, I know at some point, at some level, some of the monies were taken out for certain debts, but I didn't know if it applied to any kind of delinquent taxes or anything like that.
I don't think so. I'm sure the federal government's only concerned with what debts are owed to them.
Yeah.
Anything else regarding the financial update?
thank you.
Thank you, Omar, for
Yeah,
that
thank you, Omar.
presentation. All right, moving on to our next item, Jake break discussion. And Nate, I believe you're gonna lead that one.
So if I remember where we left off our last conversation with engine brakes, or Jake brakes, if you will, was that we had a study done by PennDOT for an area on 31st Street, just south of the tunnel, or the Norfolk Southern overpass at the city line coming down towards Broad Avenue. At the request of council, I think, and at the advice of the solicitor, due to the fact that we had to pass an ordinance to make everything official, I went out and I looked at the other routes based on some of the preliminary conditions that PennDOT gave me to, I guess, play with. And the easiest one to kind of point out or to go find out if it, you know, passes the muster was there was number 2, you guys have it, a handout there, but the average downhill grade does not exceed 4% within any 500-foot section of highway. So, you know, that's pretty flat, I guess. So with that in hand, I went out and I looked at all the state routes in the city and a couple of city routes that really I think were probably candidates here based upon what I heard last time. So as you can see, 6th and 7th Avenue, pretty much for the continuation throughout the city, would pass if we wanted to do a study on those. 17th Street from, really 6th Avenue over to Valley View, it was too steep to be a candidate. Chestnut Avenue, Pleasant Valley, Valley View, they were all okay. 18th Street was a little bit questionable, but possibly could be with some further study. Lloyd Street was okay. And then the city route, 7th and 8th Street, they were too steep. Although the city routes, of course, wouldn't need a PennDOT study because they're not PennDOT roads, but we would probably follow a similar process just to make sure we're legal and for Joe to prosecute on it, I guess. So 4th Street was too steep, and then Kettle was okay. So I guess we're just looking for some direction as council as a whole as to how you would like to proceed. Either try to get an ordinance together just for 31st Street, past that, and then work on the studies on the back end to get the rest of them on, or if 31st Street's enough. The roads that you think would be the prime candidates for the restriction are all too steep based upon PennDOT study. What's that?
Well,
Yeah.
17th Street especially.
Well, 31st Street was where a lot of our complaints were coming from, so if we could at least take that one off proceed with that one, and then see what happens after that.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that as well. That way we can get that one underway and start studying and looking at the other areas.
So just adopt this, but just right now, limit it to section of 31st Street.
Yeah, since the
see how
study is
that-
already done there
Okay.
anyways, so we might as well move forward since there was some complaints there going back. So,
Yeah, good work.
anybody else have anything on that issue?
I don't know if our acting chief has anything he'd like to add. I forgot he was sitting next to me.
The only thing I think that, if I remember correctly, didn't get clarified is where we would need to put up signage, and then I believe signage would have to be put up whenever the restriction is no longer,
In place.
in place, or if the signage is gonna specify no Jake break for the next 1,000 feet or whatever. So I think that probably needs to be put in the ordinance as well.
So like an engine brake zone?
Essentially, I mean,
Yeah.
if you have people coming through the culvert, which I suspect most of the engine braking actually occurs before the culvert because they have to slow down to make it through the culvert, and obviously we're not gonna be able to affect that too much because past the culvert's pretty much Logan Township. But as a truck would go through there, it would need to know when it's allowed to use the Jake brake, or whether the signage is just for 31st Street, or some clarification there, I would imagine.
Yeah, that was all part of our study, and I apologize for not having that. But they give us all the proper signage and the locations for that particular route, so we can.
The other issue there is that Spruce going toward Walnut, you sort of have that narrowing there where it's tough to stay in your lane
Yeah.
coming down because you got guide rail and a real tight situation there. So I have a feeling they're hammering the Jake brakes right before that curve.
So you mean on 31st Street?
Yeah,
Yeah.
on
Spruce and
31st
Walnut,
Street
okay.
coming from Logan
Right.
Township.
I mean, are we doing any hindrance there with someone not being able to use their Jake brake coming through the culvert there? Because I know that area is tight, even driving a four-door car.
Well, from the culvert up is Logan Township
Right.
anyway.
But I mean,
So-
coming into the city there. That's my old neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still back and forth on this because I don't understand how we can tell someone they can't use a DOT approved mechanism to help reduce their speed. And it's going to be something that's largely unenforceable for our police department.
Yeah, I mean, that probably is worth mentioning again. I know it's been mentioned numerous times, but essentially I think the complaints will turn into people are using their Jake brakes too. Essentially, the police aren't enforcing it. So
You'd have to actually be there.
we'd have to witness it and, to be honest with you, prioritize whether pulling over that car that actually, or the truck that you observed use the Jake brake versus, if I had resources available to do proactive traffic, I'd probably focus on speeding before the Jake brake. Again, I don't know how much it's more of a symbolic ordinance as it is actually
It's
one that'll
basically
make effect.
something that you hope that you're gonna get voluntary compliance for.
Correct.
Same with a speed limit sign. You know, you can't be there to catch everybody speeding, but you
Sure.
hope that people are going to follow the speed limit on their own.
Yes.
And I know Logan Township has been enforcing Mill Run Road, 31st Street, quite a lot lately, up above the culvert.
For speeding, not
Yeah, for
necessarily
speeding.
Jake breaks. When I spoke to Logan Township to try to get a feel for how they enforce their ordinance the way it was written, and I was basically told that they don't.
So do they ever, because I know Greenwood Road, they have posted, that's just one that I can think of in the township. Do you know if they do ever?
I was told
Issue?
no. Their ordinance is just Logan Township wide, from my understanding, and
Okay.
what I was told. That just their ordinance says simply in the, in
In
the
the
township, you
township.
cannot use this, but it's not enforced from what I've been told when I spoke to the police department.
Might not hurt to add a speed limit sign. I'm looking at this on Google Earth, and unless there was one posted recently, doesn't look like we have a speed limit sign right there when you do come into the city, because that may take care of a little bit of the issue too.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you off the top of my head without driving it where they are.
We can take a look at it.
But either way, good work.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the McCrory's building. Who's gonna lead that one?
Okay, so the fire department personnel, late last week, pumped all the water out of the basement. So that's been removed. We are awaiting the EADS engineering study. The preliminary information I received in an email today, says that the building could be saved with sufficient funding. So that's, I think, good news, at least from the city's perspective. And probably putting a new roof on the property would be the first priority, just to keep the water from continuing to erode the structure.
Omar, was that the engineering study is that what that was that they sent back?
Well, they just sent I just got a brief email.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But the full study hasn't been completed yet.
Okay.
So we're waiting to see that, but this was just kind of off the top of the senders. This came from Ron Burke. He said the overall building is sound and could be saved if someone has the funding available.
Well, that's encouraging.
Well, there have been several private folks willing to take a look at that.
And that would be the best case scenario.
Yep.
You all right?
I thought that was outside.
So that's the only thing I have on the McCrory's building at this point.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the transportation center.
Okay, so with the transportation center, I'm sure everybody knows, we didn't get either of the grants that we had applied for. The DCED grant period for 2021 is or soon will be open. I don't know, Nate, is it open yet? Do we know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, would council like us to revise the grant application and reapply?
I think
Maybe
we
with a-
should. I think we should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what we'll do. Perhaps with a added focus for, the transportation aspect of what we're looking to do with that particular building. By the way, I did, for the first time ever, tour the facility with Nate at the end of last week. I can tell you, it's not in terrible condition. It's outdated in certain areas, no doubt. And there are certain areas, the one that goes over 10th Avenue, that section really needs to get some attention in the not too distant future. But I also went through and saw what the public library and Career Link had set up there. And I think they've really brought, some life to the place.
Yeah.
And what they're doing, it looks very nice where it's at. And the library and Career Link want to extend their lease, I think till the end of August. Working with, Tom Finn, he determined it's a month-to-month lease, so we don't really council doesn't actually have to take action unless you really want to extend that lease. They're not making any payment to us, it's gratis, but, I did talk with, Gwen Fisher at the Career Link, and she said there were discussions about, a share of utility bills, and they would be willing to kind of pony up for that. So I could talk to them further about that.
Which would be great if they could do that.
Sure.
Because it is being utilized more, they are taking advantage of that, and I mean, we're trying to be kind and cooperative, but I think the fact that they wanna make the gesture of putting something towards the utilities, we wouldn't be adverse to that, right? So,
I would
Yeah.
agree with that.
yeah.
Okay, so I can get back to both, Jennifer and Gwen and talk about that with them.
And I would imagine as time has gone by, more people are utilizing the services as more people learn that there are library services there now and Career Link services there now.
I would think so.
Okay, is that all for Transportation Center?
Yes.
Moving on to American Rescue Plan.
Unfortunately, we don't have any, money in hand to answer Councilman Nicholas's question earlier. However, the Treasury Department is supposed to issue guidance within 60 days of the March 11th passage of the American Rescue Plan Act. They're also supposed to distribute 50% of whatever monies that we're supposed to have within 60 days. And that 60 days, by the way, is
May 11th,
approximately May 10th,
Yeah.
May
Yeah.
10th, yeah.
which is the time of our next council meeting, so. The city has taken the preliminary steps. We do have a DUNS number and Sam's registration, so, we're ready for the money, so to speak. And then the only other thing I had was just, I don't know, Mayor, you had mentioned in a prior discussion, the formulation of a committee of stakeholders. I don't know if you want to,
No,
Say
I mean,
more about
right
that.
now, we're still waiting on final guidance from Department of Treasury. The money has to be distributed by law according to the act, by May 10th. And we expect Treasury to have final guidance out probably by the end of this month, beginning of May, so sometime next week, hopefully. I mean, they have to have it out by May 10th, so,
right.
that being said, we don't really know yet what the eligible expenses are gonna be tied to that money, so, I think it kind of just makes sense now to just wait and see, what the final guidance and guidelines look like before we move to form any committee, because, we might put people on there and then come to find out that, expenses related to that, service or something are not covered, so, I don't know. I think it would make the most sense to just wait and see once the final guidance is issued.
Do we at least wanna maybe, put something out there as a talent bank application that if people had some interest, they could at least put their names in the hat so that when we're ready to go, we've got people, a pool of people that we could look at?
Kind of in the dog pound, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
I like your original idea of having a committee, like getting stakeholders and folks from the community involved, and even if we get our whole allotment of the 41 million, I mean, that comes out to approximately $800 per citizen, or about $2,000 per Altoona property. So we definitely would like all the input we could get so that we could stretch these tax dollars and spend them very wisely.
Linda, how long would it take us to have something like that available?
You can have it tomorrow.
So, for the news media's benefit and those watching this on broadcast, then that they should look to the city's website sometime, if not tomorrow, Wednesday then for that. Yeah, I think the only, just a comment I would make is, I just would kind of like set the table for the public that it's not like we don't have a lot of projects that we could do already with the
Yeah.
city. I mean, because we're on, you know, like Nate, our road paving schedule. What's our paving schedule? What are we really realistically doing right now?
Right. I would say right now, we're probably around a 25-year paving cycle with inflation and cost of materials.
Sure, so just with paving, I mean, 25 years is really,
That's
there's a
quite the
good
life
chance your
cycle.
road's gonna turn to gravel before we come back to pave it. And, you know, just with sidewalks and curbing, that whole issue, because there's just so much of the city that isn't going to be eligible for CDBG that we
Yes.
haven't been able to do anything with in the past. And we also have we have stormwater management projects that you know, every time, we all know that every time that there's a hard rain, we know we're gonna hear from certain neighborhoods in the city with some complaints about that. So, we do have there's a pretty big wish list for things already. So I just think we need to kind of set that expectation for the community that there's a lot of things that we have just been not able to do, that this money maybe allow us to accelerate some of that. And there are some other things, you know, Mayor, I know we've talked, you and I have talked on sidebars about things like the land bank, and we know some things that we just haven't had the money to put, that we could put out in the community for some development type issues, so.
So we have, just for your guys' knowledge, I guess, but we did start a year ago into some planning stages of
Right.
stormwater issue, you know, just the Baker Mansion area. We're gonna meet with Eads later this week, but they're moving along on a master plan, if you will. And then we have some other areas, as you alluded to, that we know when it rains, we're gonna have issues. So we're
Sure.
definitely starting to be
Oh,
a
no,
little
and please, Nate, I
proactive.
wasn't insinuating that we weren't taking
Yeah.
care of business. It's just
Right.
that we've got a lot of deferred maintenance
Sure.
in a town like Altoona. There's absolutely a lot of deferred maintenance, so.
Yeah, but hopefully with this, if we do we'll be one step ahead of the game to try to get a jump on some of these projects.
And that's where Mill Run spills, I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, you have a problem there where every street in that neighborhood turns into a river. The stormwater system that's in now isn't handling it, plus Mill Run comes out and closes down Union Avenue.
Yep.
Which, by the way, I think we should remind the public that if you live near places like Mill Run and Brush Run and Spring Run, that you really shouldn't be taking your yard waste and dumping it into the stream.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, which, I just can't believe that people do that. And they, without even thinking, they just take their yard clippings and dump it in the stream, and you can't do that. So,
One of the other things we're going to have to be careful about is the cost of materials going up, and
Oh.
many of the ingredients with the bituminous process and making the pavement, a lot of those materials are definitely going to be much higher priced in this process.
this is all gonna be prevailing wage. And I mean, if you talk to anybody, any contractor right now who's doing any kind of private work, just trying to get materials, and the cost of it is just, it's ridiculous right now. So I hope that we're gonna be able to meet some of the deadlines they give us on being able to spend this, so.
And a lot of municipal jobs across the state
Yeah.
that are being put out to bid right now, the bids are coming in pretty high.
Are we able to form an ad hoc committee at any time on something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like it's an authority, it's not like we're trying to create an authority, so it doesn't require any type of an ordinance. We can do, I mean, it's purely an advisory group. So, but I think the idea of having something available so we could start to collect names and resumes is probably a good idea, so
I
that way
agree.
we're ready to go. So, I think Linda was working on it right now, it looks like, so.
So that would be altoonapa.gov.
And what would you like to call this committee?
American Rescue Plan Advisory Board.
Okay,
There you
Done.
go.
there you go.
I would agree with that.
That was pretty creative, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The RPAB.
Board.
Anything else on ARP?
Not AARP.
All right, moving on to mayor and council discussion. Councilman Carper,
I have nothing additional to add at this time. Thank you.
Councilman Kelly.
Well, besides cautioning residents from dumping yard waste into the streams in the community, or even seeing people pour things down storm drains, which becomes a problem in the city too, when you see people do things like that. I would like to take a moment and just thank the folks at the Jaffa Shrine. They have hosted several COVID vaccination clinics. They're starting, some of those folks are they're going back to get their second shots there. They have donated the facility for the use of that. And not only have they donated the facility, but every time they've done a vaccination clinic, they've come up with about 20 volunteers to help staff that. And it has really gone very smoothly, and they've had a lot of good feedback. And I just want to congratulate those folks and Jim Miller, the leader, the potentate for the year 2021, and just congratulate them for stepping up and being good community servants.
I'll tell them you said thanks when I'm there tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Councilman Butterball.
Nah, we're good. Thanks, Mayor.
Councilman Kashadi. Councilman Ickes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, obviously, the financial presentation this evening for 2020 was much appreciated, Omar. Thank you for the information. But I think Councilman Kelly touched upon it earlier. Obviously, 2020 was a pretty devastating year on a variety of fronts, but I do want to thank our department heads, most of whom are in this room this evening, for on a variety of fronts, you really stepped up your A game and led your departments and helped, obviously, provide your expertise and service to the city. So I just want you to know that this governing body supports you, and we really appreciate the work that you've done over the last year. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Moving on to questions from the media. Bill.
Whoa. Geez, sorry. Is there any update on the Ken Decker situation? Is there any update on the on finding a permanent replacement for him?
No, Bill. No comment on that.
Okay. The McCrory building, what is the status of the effort to acquire that by eminent domain?
Omar, do you want to comment on that? Because I don't know where we are with that.
Honestly, Mayor and Bill, I don't know where we are with that either. I probably will learn a little more later in the week about it.
We were originally waiting for Eads to come back with their
Yeah,
study.
I
and
think
then-
we were very much in the
Yeah.
preliminary phases of trying to determine what the shape of the building was
Yeah.
in. So I would say we're probably nowhere close to
I think,
that.
Omar had given us some top-line data on the engineering study. I think when we have the actual document in hand, we'll be able to move forward. I don't know if we might be able to help facilitate a sale of this privately before the city would have to take any action, and that would be an ideal
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Ideally, this would be
Yeah,
a
and
private sale.
that we would also be able to get our monies back that we've invested so far. I mean, but ideally, rather than to have to go through an eminent domain process, there's several people that have expressed interest And now that if they know, and we have the engineering study, when we have the actual document in hand, know that it's, the building's in solid shape, that it's salvageable, there might even be more. So this might help facilitate a private sale without having the city to step in there and take that step, Bill.
Mhm.
Yeah, a handful of people have already come forward expressing interest. So it'd be nice to see a deal made between the current owner and one of the prospective owners, and then we wouldn't have to worry about any talks of government involvement at all.
I suppose that the possibility of eminent domain would be an incentive for the current owner to strike such a deal.
Could you please repeat that?
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I said, I suppose that the possibility of eminent domain would be an incentive for the current owner to strike a deal.
Oh,
You-
yes,
you would think.
and the fact that the studies are being done is a good incentive for people willing to jump in and buy, because now they don't have to pay for the study or do the study themselves. It could end up being a win-win.
Yeah, and what we're hearing is that right now, that engineering study will be a snapshot of right now. Somebody's gonna have to put some money into that building just to get it stabilized before they go any further with it. And, you know, you just would hate to see that this problem, it's lingered. If it continues to linger, it'll end up being the city's headache to have to take care of. So hopefully that this discussion that we've had about it will serve as a catalyst to, you know, maybe see a private sale and get somebody has the wherewithal to really do something with the building, to get in there and make something great happen. There is interest in it, so that's good. That's a good thing.
I mean, how long has this been kind of a lingering situation with the city's involvement at this point?
Over a decade, probably.
It's been probably since the current owner purchased it, so it's been at least, I would say, almost 10 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the building's deteriorated already. We don't want to see it get any worse.
Yeah. And that was our concern, is that it becomes like very similar to some of the other structures where the city ultimately had the responsibility of raising that structure.
One of the very encouraging things is there are folks that have come forward from the business community that have done similar projects before and have expertise in the type of cleanup effort and repair effort that it would take to get this building in the condition it would need to be in. There's real potential here for that to be a very nice downtown building when this is all said and done.
And that's the key component, is somebody that would have experience, that
Yes.
you feel comfortable that they're gonna move forward with the building. The last thing you wanna do is have a private, just because a private entity buys doesn't mean they're gonna be, you know, it's gonna be in any better shape. It's just, you know, it takes the headache away from the city with the hope of that prospective,
Yeah.
with the hope of that prospective buyer doing something with it, but,
Some,
yeah, the
some
key
of them are
component is-
definitely able
right.
to do
right.
what needs to be done.
Somebody with the wherewithal and
Yep.
the background, and somebody that's gonna, you know, come to us and with a proposed vision is gonna be more attractive than, obviously, than us taking care of it.
Would if the scenario you outlined as a possibility, Bruce, is that something that the city would have any control over? What kind of deal is struck? Like suppose the current owner agreed to sell it to somebody who you didn't believe had the wherewithal.
Well, we don't have title to the property now, so we couldn't control a private sale now. So, it would be nice if someone, you know, it's one thing to own a property, it's another thing to have the wherewithal to do something with it. I think it would be nice if something would come to fruition before the city felt that it was necessary to step in and take charge of the situation. But we've had, I mean, the church over on Seventh Avenue is the example I look to, Bill. I mean, you know, that ended up passing hands a couple times. The church was stripped of anything of any value. Somebody, and then it changed hands again, and I mean, it became a public safety hazard of collapsing. And I don't want to see that happen to the McQuarrie's building, and especially when you're seeing some other significant investment in the core downtown area.
Yeah, I believe that's one of the positives that is going to come from this, because now downtown is a positive place to buy into. And so the market growth there has been very encouraging.
I didn't hear, Omar, what grant do you want to is the city going to reapply for the transportation center?
It's a DCED grant.
The multimodal grant.
What about the PennDOT multimodal, also that one, or just the DCED?
I don't know about the PennDOT.
Because didn't you apply for both?
We weren't successful with either one of them. The DCED grant is the one that's currently open. The PennDOT one will probably open later this year.
Okay. And then regarding the presence of the library and the career link at the transportation center, is there any thought that those agencies would remain there afterwards, like permanently?
I don't know. I guess that would be up to them if they would, but I don't know if they would want to or not. I mean, I think it's kind of cool having those little satellite offices, but you know, that's up to the library or CareerLink if they would want to keep those secondary locations to staff after the library is back open again.
Agreed. Yeah, it's certainly been a blessing to some of our downtown residents.
It's really convenient having that there, and it is bringing people into the transportation center, so it's cool to see traffic downtown in the train station.
So it might be, if they're willing, it might be something the city would be okay with, is that what you're saying?
I think we'd be open to discussions about that, but, you know, I mean, we initially, we've only looked at this as a temporary measure. I don't think we've had any discussions with the library as to, you know, I couldn't tell you if they're anxious to get back and have everything under one roof. I mean, I know that, let's face it, anytime you have operations that go off campus to a satellite facility, you have associated costs and you have other things that you have to worry about with that. So I don't know what their long-term intentions are, but I think it's worthwhile for us to maybe have a discussion with them as we get over the summer months here to see if they'd have any interest in staying.
If they did, it would certainly help us in the grant process.
Well, it's nice to see, the property being used, and just the fact that it's being used is a help to us from a standpoint of just having somebody in there to make sure that nothing bad happens. So, but I think that's really going to be their call as to what they'd like to do. And but I think it would be worth our while to have that discussion.
And if they want to go for a grant and get enough money to buy it, we're certainly listening.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Tiffany, any questions?
As far as the American Rescue Plan, what work do you still have to do for it? What else?
Well, we're waiting to hear from the federal government on the guidelines and the rules to see what we need to do. And once we get the rules, then we'll be able to go from there.
There were some administrative steps that
Yeah.
that the manager and the interim manager had alluded to that we needed to take care of, and that's been done. We're looking at the possibility of putting together this advisory board to help provide some input from the community as to maybe help prioritize what things would be a higher priority than something else to do. So at this point, it's really kind of a waiting game to see what those final instructions will look like, and what types of rules and regulations they put in place. Because it's, we don't want to get too far ahead and talk about committing money to something and then we find out that we're not able to do it.
So do you guys have any type of timeline yet, or is it still in the process?
Well, we know that we should be hearing something by our May
May council
first meeting in May. And then right now, we're also hearing that there's some timeframes as to when that money is supposed to be spent, but I don't know that that's really hard and fast yet.
Yeah,
Because I think it's gonna be, it may be difficult to spend the money on, especially if it involves construction-type projects as quickly as they're anticipating, because I think that it's, I mean, if you even try to get something done for your house right now, it's really tough to get a contractor out there so backed up coming out of COVID. And I think it's gonna be tough as all these municipalities clamor to try to get this work done. So it's still early yet, but we feel that, I'd say based on the discussion tonight, I think we're prepared as best we can be. We need to get some more information from the federal government, and we'll keep moving forward on it.
thank you.
Is that all? Meeting is adjourned.